Do you want to suffer in your life? Everybody knows that the answer is no. We can cheat ourselves about it if we want to a certain extent. We can say, oh yes, you need suffering to appreciate happiness. But even when you say that, it means that you only want suffering in order to be able to have happiness. So finally you don't want the suffering, you only want the happiness. So you don't want suffering. Nobody will ever deliberately run towards suffering. We're always running in the opposite direction. And this, whether we realize it or not, it's actually the only thing we really care about. Running away from suffering, getting away from suffering. We might think that something else is more important to us, but if we look harder, we can see that whatever we say is important to us precisely because it is our protection from suffering in a way, or we think it's our protection from suffering. For example, having a good job is a protection from the suffering of poverty, not having money, or the insecurity of not having money. So when we hear that the Buddha's teaching is the teaching for the end of suffering, what do we think about that? What do we think is suffering? What do we think is the end of suffering, not suffering? And we should realize that this is something that addresses our most fundamental concern in our lives. Your life. The only thing that you really care about. So it's worthwhile taking time to try to understand it. What do you think suffering is? When the Buddha talks about suffering and the end of suffering, the cause of suffering, the path to end suffering, what is the suffering that he talks about? It might make us think about our worst fear, like our child dying, or our house burning down, or losing all our friends, or being in a war, being in poverty, being sick, being old and decrepit, dying, having loved ones die. But this is not what suffering is. These are objects of suffering, and one of our biggest mistakes, one of our biggest forms of ignorance as human beings is to always think that the suffering is in the object, to think of suffering in terms of the object of suffering. Not only think about it, I mean, to feel suffering only on the level of having a disagreeable object, something we don't like, or not having something that we love. And as long as we keep only seeing it in this way, looking in this way, we can't see the true nature of suffering. And when we can't see the true nature of suffering, of course we can't be free from it. We can't see what the cause is, and we can't see how to uproot it. If you were to really know what suffering is, if you were to feel suffering as suffering, then you would realize that it's within you, that you are completely responsible for it, that the cause of it is only inside you and nowhere else, and you would stop. It would end. You would already be out. You would already be out of samsara, out of suffering. So as long as we're not free from it, means we don't actually understand what it is. And why is it that when you see really where the cause is and what suffering is, then immediately you would be free from it? Well, it's because it's the only conclusion that's possible. The closer you can come to understanding the true nature of suffering, then the clearer it is that nothing else matters but removing this suffering, uprooting it. Because when real suffering is felt, then nothing matters but removing that suffering. There's no other goal, other objective. If somebody holds your head underwater so that you can't breathe, what will you think about? The only thing you will think about is getting out of the water, getting oxygen. But equally, there are many cases where people are in so much physical pain that they literally beg the people around them to kill them, to put an end to their pain. That's for them, that's the only thing that matters. They're not thinking about some pleasant thing they used to enjoy 50 years ago. And they're not wondering about what will happen to them if somebody kills them. They don't care. It's not the question. The only thing is, let this pain end. So if you were to feel the true nature of suffering, to know it, then it would be impossible to have any other priority. You wouldn't even give a momentary importance to thinking about, oh, where is my watch? Or what will I eat for dinner today? You wouldn't. The example about the person who is in so much pain that they ask to be killed, to die, is actually also a quite a good analogy for the person who is working on the path to Nibbana. Not that this person is actually on the path to Nibbana, because of course he's not. He doesn't necessarily know about the Buddha's teaching. He has no idea. He just wants to die, and he thinks maybe that will be the end. He doesn't realize that he will still continue wandering on because he hasn't solved anything. But it's still a good analogy to understand the aim that one has of attaining Nibbana, reaching Nibbana. Because people often think about Nibbana in a kind of, as if it were a place, as if it were like another paradise, another heaven. And of course that's completely mistaken, it's wrong, because it's not. It's not another place, another state of existence. And you can't aim for Nibbana as if you were aiming for another place. What will I be like there? Will I exist? Will I not exist? Will I have thoughts or not? Will I be conscious or not? If you're aiming to have a pleasant experience, to go to Nibbana because it's a very pleasant thing, then you're not actually aiming for Nibbana, you're more like aiming for heaven. But Nibbana is simply this, the end of suffering. And it's like that for the one who is in so much physical pain that he is asking somebody to kill him. He's not asking, please put me into that heaven or this heaven. He doesn't even care about what will happen to him afterwards. He doesn't think about that. All that matters, as I said, is ending this pain. And so it's like that for the one who understands the nature of suffering. Then he aims to end suffering, the true suffering. He's not aiming, I want to go to Nibbana, because he can't aim for something that he can't experience or that he can't understand through his experience. You can't aim for that. But you can aim for the end of the suffering of this existence, of all existence. And Nibbana is that, the end of suffering. That's all. So how can we understand the true nature of suffering? We have to get beyond, as I said, thinking about it in terms of objects, because this is a really big form of cheating, that if we feel suffering only when things aren't going well, then, well, as soon as things are agreeable and pleasant, we think we're fine, we think we don't suffer. And so then we sort of lose our sense of urgency in practicing Dhamma because, well, it's fine, it's okay, yeah, I'm practicing Dhamma, I'm practicing Buddha's teaching, yeah, it's grand. But we're wrong to think so. We're not grand, we're not fine. Even when there's no disagreeable object in front of us, even if we have the most agreeable, comfortable life, we're still within suffering. Even the highest of all the highest heavens, like the Brahma worlds, they're still included in the true suffering. So how can we understand this? Because it's one of the most sublime experiences, the Brahma world, for example, or the experience of heaven. It's very comfortable, very beautiful, far higher than the highest enjoyment we could imagine as a human. And yet it's still suffering. Why? It's because it dies, because it changes beyond our control. And this goes for everything. Any kind of pleasant thing that we could possibly wish for or be trying to hold on to in our lives, whatever it is, it's still within the situation of it changing beyond our control, of it being out of our hand, of it being essentially anicca, what's called anicca. So when we find things pleasant and agreeable, we think that we're not suffering, but actually we're just blinded by the desire for the agreeable thing, such that we don't see our situation as it is. There's a little parable from India that it's not certain whether it's from originally Buddhist or Hindu, but either way it illustrates very well the point that I'm trying to make here. It's the story of a man who was lost in the woods, and there are 3 tigers running after him. So he's running and running to get away from the tigers. He falls into a well. So he finds himself at the bottom of the well, looks around and then realizes that at the bottom of the well there are all these venomous serpents that, upon seeing a tasty human being, they immediately wake up and start to move towards him. So he desperately looks around trying to find a way to escape, and he notices that there is a thick vine that is hanging on the side of the well. So he thought, great, he starts to climb up this vine. There's still the tiger that is now waiting for him at the top of the well. There are the snakes waiting below. And as he's about halfway up the well, there's a little ledge, so he manages to rest himself there a little bit. And as he's resting there, he notices that there is a hive of bees just nearby. And there is honey that is dripping down onto the ledge where he's sitting. So he says, oh, I'll just taste that. So he starts to taste the honey. He says, oh, wow, it's very sweet. So he starts to eat a bit more and a bit more and a bit more. And now he's thinking to himself, oh, finally, this well is not so bad. Oh, this honey is great. There is even the friend of this man who comes at the top of the well and says, hey, come on, come out, I'm going to throw you a rope. But this man now is so much enjoying his honey that he's completely forgotten about the snakes that are waiting for him, the tiger that is waiting for him somewhere, and the danger that he's in. And he just says, no, wait, come back maybe later, but now I want to eat honey. So this story is quite famous as illustrating the nature of craving and the nature of suffering in Buddhism, or in a few different traditions as well. They put it a bit differently, but anyway, for our purposes here, it's like very nicely illustrating this point that when we enjoy the pleasant things we have, and when it's pleasant we think that we're okay and that we're not suffering and that our lives are fine. We're just like the guy who is so much enjoying his honey that he's forgotten that there are these serpents after him, that he's hanging by a little flimsy vine. Oh, and I forgot to mention there's actually also an element that there's a rat who is starting now to eat the vine that is his only support. So even then he doesn't think about the rat, he's just enjoying his honey. So that's like the people like us who, as soon as something is agreeable, we like that and we are content to sort of depend on that and to depend on searching for more agreeable things, not realizing that all of this searching for agreeable, getting it, losing it, it's all within the same situation of a situation that is really terrible, really wretched, really miserable. And it's miserable because we are dependent, absolutely dependent on things that are beyond our control, that are out of our hand, and that change beyond our control, and that are absolutely bound to fail us. And we're completely and totally dependent on them. No matter in what way we have ever suffered and will ever suffer, it has always been and will always be out of depending on something that was inherently in its nature undependable, unreliable, that could not be depended on, that could not possibly be for you, be made for you and behave according to your wish. But because we always look at the object, we never see that. So, for example, if we suffer a bad accident, like the loss of a limb, let's say we lose a hand out of some kind of accident, or we have a very serious illness, like we have cancer and we might die. So when people suffer from these kinds of things, they will blame the object that hurt them or the outside superficial cause of the accident, not seeing that this body is of a nature to be hurt and to be harmed and to be cut, to be broken. It's organic, it's soft. If you have any spoon in your house, just look at it and like take it in your hand and see which of these two objects, this hand or this spoon, is going to last longer. It's obvious it's going to be the spoon. Your body is nothing compared to it. Its nature is to become sick. Its nature is to break in all kinds of ways. It's flimsy material. And that in itself wouldn't be a problem, except that when we depend on it, and it's us, and it's ours, that's how suffering is formed. That's how suffering exists. Even when the body is not broken, already that's suffering. It's like the guy in the well when he's hanging off his little fragile vine. No sane person would call that a good situation. Hanging off this vine, having your life hang from this little thread, even when it's not broken, already we would say you should get out of that situation in which you are depending on this flimsy vine to hold you up. But the guy says, no, as long as I have my honey, I'm not suffering. If he doesn't have his honey now, if somebody takes his honey away, now he will see is a problem. But as soon as they put the honey back, everything is good again. That's like us. So just in conclusion, before I end, I want to say that this explanation is based on teachings that Ajahn gave recently, is a starting point for ourselves to look at and try to realize the nature of suffering in our lives. A theoretical idea of it is no use. But what is of use is to put it into practice, to ask ourselves when we find things agreeable, if it's really agreeable. Is it really safe? Is it really secure? Is it really reliable? Is it true happiness? Or are we depending on something that will change beyond our control? To ask ourselves when we are unhappy and suffering, what's the cause of that? What's the real cause of it? To find out where our own ignorance is in relation to that thing. Not to blame the object as we have always done.